Okay, this video is going to cover 4.3 to 4.4. It's going to talk about the powers of Congress. The three ones are expressed. That's what you're going to see when it's really written out. Implied, it's inferential based on the express power, and then other powers, like inherent powers that you need to make any government work. That's what an inherent power is. Inherent is something you're born with. Here you have some superheroes because they have powers. Get it? All right. So anyway, the big questions that are going to be covered: how do we distinguish between the views of strict and liberal constructionists? This is how uh, courts interpret the meaning of the Constitution. Some really focus and limit it to the express powers. Some are look at the implied powers and inherent powers, and they're broader in their view of it. What are the tax powers and commerce powers of Congress? Basically, money. Money's a big issue. Money is power politically. How would you describe the implied powers of Congress? Okay, fair enough. Let's go to the next one. Remember, Congress only has powers delegated or granted by the Constitution. This is important because they were frustrated that they thought the kings and queens and the British government were taking powers that they didn't really have. So this is going to be a sensitive topic forward. The powers are either expressed, implied, or inherent. Strict versus liberal construction. Oh, we have to take a closer look at this visual. Let's do that. So we have, I don't know. Is that like a Caesar? It's a sword. That's some kind of hat. I don't know. Is this supposed to be like a temple? But definitely uh, Congress, and then military forces behind them. Yeah. Anyway, strict constructionists. Anti federalists like Jefferson felt powers of Congress should only be expressed or implies. Powers that are absolutely necessary. Okay, sure. I'll buy that. Again, you see a visual, the famous painting of drafting of the Constitution. Pretty sure that's Madison up on the in blue on the right. It's definitely Madison. Let's do this. Let's reshape this and see if we can get a bigger view of this. Let's see. Yeah, that's definitely Madison. I see in here is probably Franklin. Liberal constructionists, led by Alexander Hamilton, Federalists favored a liberal or broad view of congressional powers. Mostly they were recalling that the Articles of Confederation, the main problem was a lack of federal power. This view followed wars, especially the Revolutionary War, eventually the War of 1812, economic crises and emergencies further strengthened these powers. Um, some of the emergencies, Katrina, 9/11, and the banking crisis more recently. So let's go back to the notes. And again, just do this as we go along. Don't start going way ahead and just filling in blanks. The point of all of this is to learn, not to fill in blanks quickly. I could have given you this totally filled in. It's why you only have a few blanks to fill in, um, because it's trying to keep you focused about the learning. The country needed an energetic government. This is the Hamilton view. That government is best which governs the least. That's two different philosophies. Jefferson's philosophy is the anti-federalist. Hamilton's is the federalist. And if you just mistype something, just change it. I just did. All right. One of the main powers that's important for Congress is the power to tax. That was a sensitive one because kind of drove the whole revolution. Taxation without representation. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress did not have the power to tax, so it's trying to make up for that problem. Tax is a charge levied by the government to raise money or to meet public needs. I would encourage you to try to make it look nice. The more you play with it, the more you'll more easily read it when the time comes. In 2006, the federal government took in $2.3 trillion dollars in taxes. Um, in 2016, it was 3.3 trillion dollars. So a lot of money comes into the government through taxation. So they have a lot of money available to spend. Trillion. That's a lot of zeros. But there's limits on the power to tax. For public purposes only, you can't tax exports because of the South concern that tobacco would be taxed so much, it would be an unfair burden on them. Um, as far as you can tax directly, uh, however, it has to be apportioned among the states according to population. And that's usually done through a census. And then there was an amendment that allowed for income tax, the 16th Amendment. Now the federal taxes mostly come from income taxes. An indirect tax has to be levied at the same time or same rate in all parts of the country. For example, cigarettes, gasoline, these are the most common and most important indirect tax because it brings in a ton of money. So, what's the issue here? Well, why, if income taxes are the same, does gas cost different in Texas than it does in California or Hawaii or Alaska or New York or whatever? It's additional state taxes is why. Cal EPA, California Environmental Protection Association, and states have passed tax on specific items such as gasoline um, to help regulate smog really here in California, and that causes the price of gasoline in California to be one of the highest in the countries. States and cities can have additional taxes to these items. For example, Berkeley adds a tax for soda because they feel like it's unhealthy and it makes the citizens unhealthy. Let's go ahead and take a look at this one, and then we'll go on to the next idea. Let's make sure this is back in the notes. Okay. All right. The only thing I'm sure of is death and taxes and homework. That's how kids see it. That's funny and probably true. All right, borrowing money. Article one has all the congressional powers. By the way, money borrowed and not repaid is called public debt. From 1931 to 1988, only 7 years without a public debt. 1998 to 2001, there was a surplus of money. I think it was because the Graham-Rudman Act was passed to try to limit deficit spending. From 2002 forward, there's been a deficit. There's been an ongoing deficit. They should stop the deficit because eventually they have to pay that back, and then you're financing the deficit more and more each year. Debt financing is when the government borrows money to pay the old debt. If there's enough money, they just need to change how they're spending, or not spend as much. But they don't want to because it's unpopular. They have to say no to certain things. And when politicians say no, they were worried about getting voted out. Anyway, in 2018, there was a $21 trillion debt. What is it today? Let's find out after we fill in these notes. Trillion's a lot of zeros. I think I'm going to write what 21 trillion looks like on the board. Uh, it's like billion plus three zeros. A lot. Let's take a look. Current federal 28.43 trillion. So it's up 7 trillion. This was at the end of 2021. That's close enough. So let's write that in. 28.43 trillion. Holy money. A lot of money owed. How much of what owed is just interest? So it's always rising. That's what this clock means. This is very alarming. Debt persistent. Oh, apparently it's 29.9. $543 billion in interest. Holy mackerel. Interest on debt. It's like $424 billion. So what the question is, how much would have owed is just interest? That's the number. 424 billion. Wow. Feeling unfair to do the next generation. That's what's happening. I think we should bookmark this. Put it right on there. This is very alarming, but it's kind of interesting. Let's put it right on here. And let's put it on the original doc too. Now let's continue. But it doesn't take nearly as much as we projected because they shaved off a little of the debt. Really, if we just stopped spending money we had and started running a surplus and cut where you had to, it would be manageable. But there's a lack of political will to do the right thing. And it's really going to cost the next generation. You really can't control your finances until you stop spending money you don't have. And so the federal government needs to wake up and do the right thing and have the will to do so. But they don't. So they don't. Everyone's like, let's worry about it later. And that is not going to be an attitude that's going to help in the long run. I don't like how this picture is blocking. Let's do this, but then stretch it way out. So there was a case on the Commerce Clause. Congress has the power to regulate commerce under Article 1, interstate and foreign trade as well. Falls within that umbrella. And write that in. In 1824, there's a Supreme Court case, Gibbons v. Ogden. It's another seminal case where the Supreme Court ruled the federal government had broad powers of commerce because they needed it, because the states couldn't handle this themselves. That's what we learned under the articles. And so that's the way it is. And now, good, we're still recording. But there's limits on the commerce power because, remember, those rights are delegated. You can't tax exports. That's written right in there. And that was in early laws in America. Being sent out are not taxable. Can't favor one state's ports over another. Have their dealings. You can't require vessels in one port to go to another to pay duty. You can't go from one port to the other. You want one spot to pay your tax on goods coming in of imports, not multiple spots. Couldn't interfere with the slave trade until 1808. Remember that compromise that was going to last 20 years? This is that coming back. 1787 is when the Constitution is pretty much ratified and really into existence. That 20 years was up in 1808, and you could, if you wanted to. This is a cargo ship with some containers on it. All right, let's go to the next one. See, there's a lot of powers. That's why this one's pretty long. Currency power. The government has the power to coin money, coin or print money, as the case may be, and regulate its value. States are forbidden this power because things were such a mess with currency under the Articles. Coins were minted in gold, silver, etc. from the start. Congress created a national paper currency, which was later deemed legal tender. It has full faith and credit written on there. And eventually, it becomes not backed by gold or silver, but by fiat. It is what it's worth because the government says it's worth that, and that's what it is today. Yeah, let's take a look real quick. We have some gold coins, some money, some dogs. That's $1 billion bill. I don't think there really is $1 billion bill. There's definitely not a bill with a dog on it, even though nothing wrong with a good dog. All right, here's the bankruptcy. Uh, the federal government can regulate bankruptcy. That's a legal process by which assets are distributed when a person's unable to pay their debts. Basically, they get rid of the debtor's prison and create bankruptcy courts instead. So we don't throw a bunch of broke people in jail. Instead, we just take all their stuff. States share this power with the federal government, but nearly all bankruptcies are in federal courts. All right, because that's where the power resides. Distributed, it is sold. So if you ever hear of things being sold in auction, it's usually because of bankruptcy or some kind of seizure due to a criminal act. They have the power to seize things under RICO. We might get that to later. We might not. I don't know. If you're curious, ask me about this after the lecture. Okay. So federal courts is where bankruptcy issues tend to be resolved. There are more expressed powers. You have foreign powers. This is the power to control national security, work out trade or environmental agreements with other nations. Then you have war powers. Under the war powers, you have the power to raise, support armies, declare war, and provide funding for them. Then you have naturalization. This is the process for immigrants to become citizens. Usually, some requirements are needed, but that power resides with Congress, and they have the power to make immigration laws. Postal power. You have the power to create post offices. I think Lodi got its name because they decided McCollum was too long of a name for the post office and too hard to spell, probably, I'm sure. But there's like three different reasons why Lodi became Lodi. So I don't know if the intent of everyone that agreed to the name Lodi was the same. You have copyright and patents law resides with the federal government. Um, that's a way to protect uh, intellectual property. Weights and measures. You create national uniformity on measuring, whether it's a gallon, whether it's a foot, whether it's a yard, whether it's a pound. We all agree that the same weight is going to be the same wherever you go. So people are talking the same language, measuring things. Things are done fairly. Um, this is particularly important when an eminent domain is used because you're supposed to give a fair compensation for any item taken by the federal government. Then you have the judicial power. Uh, Basically, you have the power to create federal courts and define federal crimes and punishment. A lot of images on here. Okay, so the Army one goes with war powers, copyright, copyrights and patents, uh, post office, postal power, judicial powers, National Park Service. That comes on the power to regulate the territory. I think this is foreign powers. You know, it's someone from a different country. I would need to see it closer to know for sure. So let's look closer. Yeah, see the flag. All right. So the implied powers come from mostly from the necessary and proper clause. Uh, Basically, this clause is seen as elastic because what's necessary and proper can be seen quite broadly, though it's possible it can be seen somewhat narrowly too. Strict constructionists oppose liberal use of implied powers. McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819, Chief Justice Marshall Supreme Court ruled that Congress could create a national bank under necessary and proper clause. This led the way for many more implied powers. Okay, let's write that in. They call it elastic because it's flexible. It can expand as needed, fit whatever the need is. All right. Strict instructions oppose a liberal interpretation of necessary and proper clause. But if you have no interpretation of it, then it kind of becomes meaningless too. McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819, Chief Justice Marshall and Supreme Court ruled that Congress could create a national bank under the necessary and proper clause. After that, couldn't be too narrow. This led the way for many more implied powers under the necessary and proper clause. Establishing a bank was absolutely necessary to carry out Congress' power to tax. Exactly. That's why we want it stopped. Because they don't want taxes. Or they only want state taxes. Uh-huh. I get it. Let's make this a little bigger even. That's good. So we're almost done here. There's a couple more slides and we'll be on the quiz. Non-legislative powers. These are the amendments. Um, Amendments, you have the power to propose amendments in the amendments. You have electoral duties. The 12th Amendment says that the House of Representatives votes to decide a president if there's no electoral college majority winner. If there was a third party, this can happen. You're supposed to get more than half, at least by one. Jefferson, John Quincy Adams were the result of this process kicking in. And basically, the Senate will pick the vice president. When the House of Representatives decides who's president, it gets pretty intense. Let's go ahead and write that in, and then we'll keep talking. It's good to read a little, write a little, move on. Read a little bit, write a little bit, move on. I'm going to go ahead and write in representatives all the way. I don't need to abbreviate on my notes there. If I want to reread it, I want it to be easy. There's no majority. No, electoral college. Majority. You have to get 50 plus 1. 50% plus 1 to have a majority. Impeachment. House has the power to impeach or bring a president to trial. This has been done successfully quite a few times. It happened with Trump. In the Senate, though, they try the impeachment case. So it's basically like arraignment criminally. The Senate acts as like the trial court, jury. This thing is usually politicized. I think in the Trump case that stemmed from January 6th, it was super political. When I don't think it should have been, but yeah. Anyway, oftentimes when a president thinks they're going to lose, they're going to resign. But Johnson in 1868, Andrew Johnson, Clinton in 98, both acquitted. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. That's what the Clinton impeachment case was about. Nixon in 74 had some tapes and did some corrupt things at Watergate. And so he resigned, which means he quit before the charges were brought. And then his replacement, of course, pardoned him. And then so they can move on quickly. Oh, that. Let's put this in the notes too. All right, let's go to the quiz. This is a long section. One more. Okay. Executive powers. The Senate has the power to make appointments. Um, this what Senate approved presidential appointments. Sorry, or reject as they see fit. Um, Lately, it's been going along party lines, especially for Supreme Court nominations. They also have the power to approve treaties. If the Senate rejects them, though, the president can just have an executive agreement. But treaties tend to outlast presidents. Executive directives do not. They have investigatory powers in the Senate to provide data for legislation, oversee executive agencies. They have a judiciary committee comes in, and yeah, they're supposed to. There's a lot of lawyers, as we recall, so they're pretty good at doing this. Uh, they can investigate vital public issues. There's a concern with corruption, expose questionable activities of individuals in and out of government. I remember they brought in suspects from the steroid era in baseball. So all these things are potential committee investigatory issues, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like why they're doing. How do we distinguish between the views of strict and liberal constructions? Basically, how they interpret the necessary and proper clause. Strict constructionists look at it narrowly. Liberal constructions tend to look at it broadly. What are the tax and commerce powers of Congress? Tax. Um, they can have direct taxes if it's apportioned equally. Indirect taxes must be at the same rate. Um, but now, because of the 16th Amendment, you can have federal income taxes. In the Commerce Act, the government has broad power to regulate trade between the states and between foreign countries. That's your answer. And again, I'm not typing it up. Make sure it's a sentence. How would you describe the implied powers? The implied powers um, come from the necessary and proper clause. How flexible are we going to be to grant Congress powers that are deemed necessary and proper under the Constitution? I think that's it for this one. Next time we'll finish it up with looking at Congress at work. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it was helpful.